There is a sidewalk near your house that is already cracking. It is maybe 10 years old. Give it another decade and it will be crumbling at the edges, veined with hairline fractures, patched over with tar that never quite matches. You have probably stopped noticing it. Concrete failing is just what concrete does. Now picture a breakwater sitting on the floor of the Mediterranean Sea. It has been submerged for over 2,000 years. Waves have hammered it every single day since before Rome had emperors. And instead of dissolving, instead of crumbling the way your sidewalk will, it has been getting stronger. That should not be possible. But the real answer is far stranger than ancient people were just better builders. It is not a matter of skill. It is not even a matter of secret ingredients lost to time, though for a while that is exactly what historians assumed. The real answer is that Roman concrete was never designed to resist damage in the first place. It was designed to survive it, and those are two completely different engineering philosophies, separated by 2,000 years of assumptions nobody bothered to question. Start with what you actually know about concrete. Modern concrete is Portland cement, sand, gravel, water, and steel rebar buried inside for tensile strength. It is strong the day it is poured. It is essentially inert. Once it cures, it is finished changing. Any crack that forms after that point stays a crack. Water gets in. The steel rebar inside rusts. Rust expands. The expanding rust pushes outward and shatters the concrete around it from the inside, a failure mode engineers call spalling. You can watch it happening on almost any highway overpass built after 1960. Most concrete structures poured in the last century are already rated for a 50 to 100 year lifespan, and plenty fail long before that. Now, hold that against a structure like the Pantheon in Rome. Its dome has stood, unreinforced, with no steel inside it at all, for almost 1900 years. It is still the largest unreinforced concrete dome on the planet. No modern engineer would attempt that same design today without steel, because modern concrete cannot be trusted to hold its own weight that long without support. So the question is not really, how did the Romans make good concrete? The question is why an entire empire built with a formula that modern materials science spent nearly 2,000 years failing to reverse engineer. Roman concrete does not work like this at all. The Romans called it opus cementitium, and the recipe survives because a Roman architect named Vitruvius wrote it down around 20 BCE in a treatise called De Architectura. He described mixing lime with a specific volcanic ash, harvested from the region around the town of Puteoli, near modern-day Pozzuoli. Pliny the Elder mentioned the same ash decades later, marveling that it turned to stone the moment it touched seawater. Neither of them fully understood why. They just knew it worked, and they used it to build harbours, aqueducts, and a dome in the Pantheon that is still, to this day, the largest unreinforced concrete dome on Earth. For almost 2,000 years, that was where the explanation stopped. Good stone, good recipe, good luck. 20th century engineers tried repeatedly to reproduce Roman concrete using the same volcanic ash and the same lime, following Vitruvius's instructions almost word for word. The results were durable, sometimes impressively so, but they still cracked the way modern concrete cracks. Whatever made the Roman version different was not sitting in the ingredient list. It was hiding somewhere inside the process itself, in a step nobody had thought to question closely enough. Then in 2023, a team at MIT led by Admir Masic went looking for something that had bothered engineers for over a century. Roman concrete is full of small white mineral chunks called lime clasts. For decades, the assumption was that these clasts were evidence of sloppy mixing, poor quality control by ancient standards. Masic did not buy it. Why would an empire capable of building the Pantheon consistently fail at the single most basic step of making concrete? So his team studied the clasts at a microscopic level, using techniques the original Roman engineers could never have imagined, let alone measured. What they found rewrote the story completely. The clasts were not a mistake, they were a mechanism. The Romans were using quicklime, the highly reactive, undiluted form of lime, mixed directly into the batch at extremely high temperature, a process now called hot mixing, instead of first slaking the lime with water the slower, safer, more conventional way. This left behind reactive deposits scattered throughout the concrete, deposits that just sit there, dormant, waiting for centuries if they have to. Think about what that actually means. Somewhere in the 1st century, a Roman builder made a choice that looked, on the surface, like a shortcut. Skip the slaking step, mix it hot. And that choice, whether anyone alive at the time understood it or not, encoded a repair system directly into the wall. Here is where it gets strange. When a crack eventually forms in the concrete, and cracks always eventually form, water finds its way in. That water reaches one of these lime clasts, and the clast reacts with it, creating a calcium-rich solution that flows directly into the crack and recrystallizes, sealing the wound shut from the inside. The concrete does not resist the crack. It responds to it. It heals. Does that sound familiar? It should. It is closer to how a body works than how a building material is supposed to work. A scar is not the absence of injury. It is proof the injury already healed. Roman concrete carries thousands of tiny scars like that waiting inside it, doing nothing until they are needed, and the self-healing was only half the discovery. In 2017, a separate team led by Paulo Monteiro at UC Berkeley and the geologist Marie Jackson at the University of Utah studied concrete pulled from Roman harbors that had been sitting in open seawater for 2 millennia. What they found should have been impossible under any modern engineering model. As seawater percolated through the volcanic ash inside the concrete, it dissolved certain components and allowed entirely new minerals to grow in their place. Aluminous tobermarite, phillipsite, rare, hard-to-synthesize crystals that grew in interlocking plates directly inside the microscopic structure of the material. Every wave that hit those piers, every drop of salt water that seeped through a crack, was not eroding the structure. It was feeding it. The ocean was quite literally building the Roman harbour stronger, one mineral deposit at a time, for 2,000 years straight. Modern concrete in seawater lasts, on average, a few decades before it needs replacing entirely. Coastal engineers today spend enormous budgets protecting concrete from the exact environment the Romans deliberately built into. The Romans did not just tolerate the sea, they built things that used it as a construction partner, something that kept adding to the structure long after the original builders were dead. Jackson has spent years comparing these ancient samples to actual volcanic rock, treating 2,000-year-old harbour concrete the way a geologist would treat a lava flow that is still slowly evolving underground. That framing alone tells you how wrong the solved recipe story really was. This was never a static material. It was closer to a living mineral system, one that Roman engineers set into motion without knowing what it would still be doing 2 millennia later. So why did this knowledge disappear? That is the real mystery, and it might matter more than the chemistry itself. It was not lost in a fire. It was not erased by conquest. It simply stopped being useful. When the Roman Empire's infrastructure and trade networks collapsed, so did the supply chains that got volcanic ash from specific quarries to specific construction sites. The knowledge was never written down in a way that separated the how from the why, because nobody in antiquity understood the why. Vitruvius could describe the recipe. He could not describe hot mixing chemistry or aluminous tobermarite, because those concepts did not exist yet. Knowledge tied only to practice and not to underlying principle is fragile. It survives exactly as long as somebody keeps doing the practice. The moment that chain breaks, even once, the knowledge does not get forgotten gradually. It disappears in a single generation. That pattern is not unique to concrete. It shows up again and again in the history of lost engineering, in techniques for tempering metal, in construction methods for structures nobody can fully replicate today. The information rarely burns in some dramatic library fire, no matter how good that story sounds. It just stops being passed down, quietly, one workshop and one apprentice at a time. And by the time someone asks the right question again, the people who could have answered it are gone. What survived from Rome was the object, not the understanding. The Pantheon stood there for centuries as a question nobody had the tools to answer yet. Which brings this back to you and to that cracked sidewalk outside your house. Modern engineering, for all its precision, still largely follows the same philosophy that failed to protect that concrete. Build it strong, keep water out, prevent all damage, and treat any crack as the beginning of the end. It is a strategy built entirely around avoidance, and avoidance only works until the first failure, at which point there is no plan left. The Romans built around a completely different assumption. Damage is inevitable. Cracks will happen. Water will get in, whether you want it to or not. So instead of fighting that reality, build the material itself to respond to it rather than collapse under it. You do the same calculation constantly, whether you notice it or not. Every time something breaks a routine, a relationship, a plan, you have a choice between two philosophies without ever framing it that way. You can build your life to prevent every crack, bracing against anything that might go wrong, treating any damage as permanent and final, something to be hidden or patched over and never mentioned again. Or you can build in a mechanism for repair, something that responds to stress by reinforcing itself instead of simply failing at the fracture point. Not resilience as a slogan, resilience as a structural feature, engineered in before the damage ever happens. Why does one path feel so much harder to choose than the other? Maybe because prevention feels like control and repair feels like admitting you were never fully in control to begin with. But the harbour in the Mediterranean was never in control of the ocean either. It just stopped treating the ocean as the enemy and built something that could take the impact and turn it into material. Think about how much energy goes into pretending nothing is cracked. The patched sidewalk, the relationship running on the same unresolved argument for years, the version of yourself you show people, sealed up and inert, terrified that one visible fracture means the whole structure is compromised. None of that is strength. It is just concrete waiting to spoil. The Romans were not smarter than modern engineers. They did not have better tools or deeper science or any real understanding of the chemistry happening inside their own walls. They just built for a world where things break instead of quietly pretending they would not. There is a sidewalk near your house that is already cracking. Maybe that was never the failure you thought it was. Maybe it is just concrete that was never built to heal.